Hey everyone, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall, and today I want to talk a little bit about what I believe is really sort of the core principle of running a game when you're aiming for that classical sandbox experience. It's what I like to kind of consider a principle of OSR game mastering, and it's really around the idea of focus on presenting the world and reacting honestly to the players. Now, if you're coming from a more modern D&D background or maybe just another style of game mastering, that could probably sound a little bit passive. You might be thinking, where's the plot? Or don't I need some sort of story structure prepared? And the answer in sandbox gaming is often a resounding no, or at least not in the traditional way that you think. So let's go ahead and break down what this principle actually means in practice, and then talk about why it matters for sandbox gaming. Now let's focus on that first portion of our principle, which is presenting the world. This isn't about crafting an intricate narrative arc or a multi-session plot for your players to explore. Instead, your primary job as the game master in a sandbox is really to be their eyes, ears, and all other senses of the players as they explore. You are the narrator of the living and breathing environment. The world existed long before the player characters have been in it, and it'll continue to exist in some form after they are gone. Like most campaigns, you probably have some sort of history, factions, monsters, and of course, opportunities and possible dangers for the players to check out. Now, all this is great. So what does this really look like at the table? I think we can kind of break it down into a few key elements. The first, and probably the most simplistic, is detailed descriptions. When the players are entering into new areas, you as the game master, it's your job to describe what they're seeing, hearing, smelling. Is the air damp? Does it smell like ozone? Are there some sort of strange carvings on the walls they can check out? Now, none of this is really any different than any other style of game. You as the game master, of course, have to relay that information to your players via your narration. But in a sandbox, this is really important to think about what you're presenting to them and how you're presenting it to them, because they are the ones that need to take the actions upon themselves to drive the story forward. So it's up to you to provide that critical information. So it's worth mentioning here. Next, we have verisimilitude. You need to really make the world believable within its own fantastic logic. If there's a dragon in the area, then where does it live? What does it eat? Who does it terrorize? Does its presence affect the local economy or ecology in some sort of way? These are things that you might want to give some consideration to so you have an interesting world for your players to explore. The sandbox is all about playing the world, not the plot. So you should be trying to focus on these different parts as they're moving. Are they acting in unison or opposition of one another? The simulation of your sandbox is really what's going to present your players with those adventuring opportunities for your players to get involved and make their own way through your campaign world. Next, we have the idea of fronts. Instead of pre-scripted plots, you should think in terms of fronts. I first heard about the idea of fronts from the game Dungeon World, and I'll post a link to the free SRD so you can read a little bit more about them there. But the idea that there are factions or forces in the world that have their own plans and they want to progress along those agendas. And if the players do nothing to intervene, their plans will start to come to fruition, and the players will start to see that and experience that in the world. And it's kind of this idea of the players are facing multiple fronts, sort of like in the terms of war, where you can have a multi-front war. Now, fronts really sort of build on that verisimilitude aspect, and they are sort of these dynamic situations that the world is progressing independently of the players. A few examples would be maybe a goblin king is amassing an army and marching across the land. Maybe the cultists are trying to unearth an ancient tomb and whatever lies within it. Or maybe a nearby town is suffering from a plague, and that plague is now starting to slowly spread across the land. These are all different types of fronts that have ultimate end games that could be problematic for the players if they choose not to interact with them. And that's the thing to really keep in mind. These situations are things that the players can interact with, but they aren't forced to. They're simply things happening in the world. And if the players want to get involved, then of course that can stop the front or dramatically alter the course of its direction. But if they don't, they'll start to see some of those consequences unwind in the world around them, and they'll realize that they aren't the only movers and shakers or important forces in the world that are really making changes to your sandbox campaign. The last main element to think about is really not to withhold information unless it's specifically secret or hidden in the world where they have to go and uncover it. If there's a clue, maybe an NPC who might know something, I think signposting that and presenting it clearly to the players to give them some ideas on directions they could go is a really good idea. You don't want to grind the sandbox to a halt because you're withholding all this information from them. Maybe have the villagers mention that, oh, the wizard over here could help them with that problem. They've seen them studying strange symbols before, or whatever. That can really help the players along their goal of figuring out the different mysteries or elements of exploration that they're looking into in your sandbox and really kind of move that momentum forward. And of course, if the players miss it, even though you're presenting these signposts, well, that's their choice, but you've put it out there so they have that opportunity to see it. The goal here across presenting the world is really to create a sense of place, a tangible reality that the players can interact with, and you're sort of building this sandbox for them to explore and change elements in. You're not writing a play where they're kind of going through your different narrative arcs. Now, the second component of our key principle is really where the magic starts to happen in a sandbox game. And of course, that is the idea of reacting honestly to players' actions. Once you've presented the world to your party, your role shifts to becoming this sort of sophisticated, impartial engine that runs the world. The players will inevitably do things that you don't expect. They might go left when you thought they'd go right. They'll try to talk to the monster instead of fight it. Your job is not to steer them back on some sort of predetermined path. Your job is to answer the question, what would honestly happen in the world given what the players just did? And that really leads us to the key elements of reacting honestly to the players that can kind of help give you some guidance on how to think about that. The first idea is really embracing player agency. I think this is the most critical and paramount idea. Their choices need to matter, and they should have real, tangible consequences, good or bad, to what their actions were. If they decide to kick down the door of a sleeping ogre, the ogre's likely going to wake up and is probably going to be pretty upset about it. If they spend a week researching some ancient lore, they might uncover a hidden weakness of their enemy or perhaps a forgotten treasure that they could exploit in a fight with it. Their actions should have tangible results, and that's really the idea of player agency. Let them make choices and then figure out how those fit in the world and how you can express them back to the players. The second idea is around avoiding railroading. Now, this is the exact opposite of reacting honestly. We don't talk a lot about railroading on this channel, mostly because the ideas of sandboxes are pretty antithetical to it. But railroading is, when you're forcing your players down a specific path regardless of their choices. In a sandbox game, if they want to ignore your carefully crafted dungeon and go exploring in the wilderness, then you need to let them. You shouldn't force them into the dungeon. Instead, you got to figure out what's out in that wilderness that they can go explore. Now, one tip I do talk about on this channel a lot is the idea of getting your players to commit to a plan of action at the end of each session. So if they want to go check out that dungeon, they've committed to that and you know where to focus your prep for the next week so you can kind of plan that session and have it ready to present to them. But sometimes things happen, plans change, and they want to go off in a different direction, in which case that's where you got to resist the urge to try to railroad them into something you've already made and instead let them explore the world in the way that they choose. The next element is really around the idea of consulting your random tables and prep work. Now, I think this is really where a good game master's prep for a sandbox can shine through. You aren't anticipating every action, but you're prepared for a wide range of possibilities. If your players go left instead of right, you have these tools you can rely on. Your random encounter tables, your monster stats, your factions motivations, your dungeon maps that you can maybe slot into any sort of random wilderness hex. These are tools for reacting quickly and consistently to the player's choices when they do something maybe outside of your prep work that you did ahead of time. Now, I do think a lot of your prep work should be focused on building out these random tables and resources that help present your campaign specifically to the players. Generic random tables are fine. They get the job done in a pinch, but giving some time and effort and thought to these different prep materials is really going to help you with that whole presenting the world bit we just talked about. This is really where you can show your world if you have these tools built ahead of time, right? Rather than just a random, 6 orcs that the players encounter, maybe you have some sort of specific orc faction. And when you roll on your random encounter table, they come up, and now you can sort of start to have this interesting story emerge because you know about that faction. Now they've showed up in front of the party. What's going to happen? We don't know, but this starts to emerge because you've built those materials out for your world specifically. Next is really around the idea of being flexible and improvisation. Sometimes you're not going to have an immediate answer to the player's actions, and that's okay. I think it's entirely reasonable to step back, take a breath, and really think about the established logic of your world and make a ruling that sort of feels consistent and fair within that internal logic structure. Don't be afraid to say, let me think about that for a second. Or you could even roll dice, maybe, on a D6, 1 to 2, this happens, and on a 3 to 6, this happens. Adding a bit of randomness at the right times can sort of really ratchet up the tension to the player's actions, and it can keep you from overexerting your biases or preconceived ideas of what might happen. Just be aware that your biases probably do come through a bit if you're not using a pure 50-50 roll, because if you're weighting it in one direction, that is technically a biasy. But at the end of the day, the dice are rolled and they are going to tell us what happens at the table. And that can be a really interesting and powerful tool. The whole idea of improvisation and being flexible, I think really coincides well with that one we just talked about having your random tables, your prep work done ahead of time. That really helps you with these kind of procedural generations when you don't know what's going to happen next. Those you can lean on, and then that really helps you build out your improvisation for whenever the players do something that you didn't anticipate ahead of time. The final element is really around the idea that the world will push back. There will be consequences. If the players continue to make reckless decisions, the world should push back. The guards will be alerted, monsters will try to track them down. Consequences are going to pile up based on whatever the party decides to do. Now, this isn't about punishing players. Of course, you can have good consequences too. It's really more about the world behaving realistically given what the party is doing. This really creates that dynamic and emergent narrative. The story isn't pre-written by you. It's co-created by the players at the table through their interactions and choices and the world's honest reactions to what they're doing. Another way you can think about this is Newton's third law of motion. Action has an equal and opposite reaction. Now, of course, this isn't physics, so it doesn't have to be an equal reaction, but the idea is there should be consequences. Think about the consequences and play them out in your sandbox. So why is this key principle, what we're talking about today, why is it so crucial for sandbox play? I think there are a few different reasons. And the first is really the idea of getting the players to buy in and invest in your campaign. When the players know that their choices genuinely matter and the world isn't just a facade, they start to become deeply invested. They strategize, they plan, and they really care about the consequences and some of the other key players in the world. Maybe they've aligned with some factions or others, and they want to know what's going to happen next. And that's a really great feeling as a game master, having these players that are invested. And it's mostly because of their actions, not necessarily what you're doing, but it's something you're creating together. And I think that's a really important and key aspect when we're looking at all of this. We've talked about it on this channel before, but when you have these sandbox environments that you're playing your games in, you really get the emergent storytelling rather than that pre-scripted plot. I have found as a game master, this is where my truly memorable stories have come from. Not some script I've wrote, but from the twists and turns generated from honest play and random dice rolls. The time the rogue tried to tame the owlbear, or the time when the party accidentally unleashed a zombie plague on the town. These are stories that get retold for years because the player's actions are what drove them, and some sort of memorable outcome happened because of that. I've also found when I've run sandbox games, I have a lot less game master burnout. I don't have to be constantly turning out complex plots or writing some sort of outline structure on what should maybe happen next. Instead, my prep shifts from focusing on that to building more robust reactive systems, building interesting locations, building interesting characters that the players can interact with. And we'll find out what happens at the table once they start to interact with them. But that is where my prep is. And that to me is a lot easier to design and implement. I find that I start to become more of a facilitator and less of a storyteller that's trying to control everything. And lastly, I think sandbox campaigns really bring forth these authentic challenges to your party. The game feels more dangerous and rewarding because the stakes are real. Success isn't guaranteed, and failure is a genuine possibility. We don't know what's going to happen when the players take their actions. The dice rolls are going to determine that. There's no story ahead of time. They could very well fail. And that, I think, really makes every triumph all the sweeter and more memorable from these games. So if you're looking to dive into sandbox game mastering, I think remembering the principle, present the world and react honestly to the players, is going to serve you really well. Build a compelling and consistent reality, and then just let your players loose within it. Be prepared to be surprised, to improvise, and to watch as these incredible and unpredictable stories unfold right there at your table. I think sandbox play is a different mindset for sure, but I'd say if you have never tried it before, maybe give it a shot and see if you can embrace it, if you enjoy it. I know that I've found my games to be more vibrant, more engaging, and ultimately more fun for everyone involved. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this sort of key principle. Do you have any examples from your own games where, the world has had huge consequences based off the player's actions? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Check out Enchanted Nimbus, my monthly newsletter. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.